All right, let's dive into a true literary giant, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It's an incredible book, but let's be honest. That dense, foggy writing can make you feel just as lost as the characters sailing up the Congo River.
You know that feeling, right? Where you're adrift in these unsettling themes and that shadowy language, just completely overwhelmed. Well, you are definitely not alone. But what if I told you there's a way to not just survive that journey, but to actually take the helm yourself? See, the real key to unlocking this story, to go from just following the plot to doing a high-level analysis, is a specific set of words. These terms are the tools you need for real academic precision. So think of this vocabulary as your compass.
So let's get started. To really get what's going on in the story, we first have to understand the world it's happening in. We're going to begin by mapping out the political and historical machine that's driving this entire narrative.
First up, and this is absolutely essential, is colonialism. Now, this isn't just a backdrop or some historical flavor, no. This is the fundamental system that powers every single thing that happens in the story. It's the engine for the whole enterprise.
And here, we see exactly how colonialism works in the book. It's a system built on a complete lie. Conrad is showing us that this grand idea of a civilizing mission is really just a noble-sounding mask for what's actually happening: brutal, greedy theft of ivory.
So the big takeaway here is that this system just poisons everything, and everyone it touches. It hides its ugliness behind pretty words. It's the reason for that intentionality of decay you see at the stations. They're not falling apart by accident. The hunt for wealth just steamrolls over any concept of human rights, and in the end, it leads to the total moral collapse of the colonizers.
Okay, so we've looked at the external world. Now let's turn inward, into the psychological landscape of the characters. We're going to explore what happens to the minds of these Europeans when all the rules of their society are stripped away by the jungle.
And that brings us to a really key concept: atavism. This was a huge fear for the Victorians. This idea that civilization was just this paper-thin layer, and that if you weren't careful, it could be ripped away, causing you to slip back into some primitive, ancestral version of yourself.
And what's so brilliant here is that this pull isn't just for a monster like Kurtz. Even our narrator, Marlowe, feels it. When he talks about feeling a kinship with the drums he hears from the shore, that's him admitting he feels that same primal pull from deep inside himself.
And this, right here, is the psychological key to the whole book. Understanding atavism shows us that the darkness isn't some kind of infection you catch from the jungle. No, it's a dormant trait that's already inside them. The wilderness doesn't create the darkness, it just wakes it up. And that is why the jungle is able to whisper so powerfully to their souls.
Okay, let's push deeper, right into the philosophical core of this novella. We've looked at the world and the mind, and now it's time to face that terrifying realization waiting at the end of the river, the idea that literally drives Kurtz insane.
So at the very climax of his journey, Kurtz has this massive revelation. He stares right into what the book calls the metaphysical void, and whatever he sees there sends him spiraling into moral madness.
And the best way to understand that revelation is through the idea of nihilism. It's this terrifying philosophy that says when you strip everything away and look right into the heart of existence, you find nothing. No grand plan, no divine justice, no meaning. It's all baseless.
So what happens in a world like that? Well, if there's no meaning and no one's keeping score, the only thing that's real is pure absolute power. This is the philosophy Kurtz embraces to justify all the horrible things he does, and it's the same terrifying abyss that Marlowe is trying so hard to avoid by just focusing on the simple reality of work.
And that brings us to those famous last words. The horror, the horror. That's his final judgment, not just on his own life, but on the whole universe. The horror is finding out that at the very heart of everything, there's just a terrifying nihilistic void.
Okay, for our last section, let's look at how Conrad actually uses his writing style to create that famous unsettling feeling. Because with this book, it's not just what he says that matters, it's how he says it.
Two huge literary tools he uses are ambiguity and duality. Ambiguity is that pervasive fog you feel all through the story, where nothing is ever totally clear and the truth is always just out of reach. And duality is that constant pairing of opposites, light and dark, civilization and savagery. Even those two knitting women who somehow represent both life and death.
And the effect of all this is huge. In Conrad's world, there are no easy moral judgments. No character can be slapped with a simple label like hero or villain, not even Marlowe or Kurtz. And that's exactly why the story doesn't give us a neat little ending. It leaves us with that famous, unsettling, unresolved feeling, because Conrad wants us to sit with that discomfort.
So, once you're armed with this vocabulary, your whole relationship with the book changes. You're not just a passive passenger anymore, being carried down the river and watching things happen.
You now have a complete navigator's toolkit. You've got colonialism as your map of the world, atavism as your psychological compass, nihilism helps you see the philosophical destination, and ambiguity and duality are like your atmospheric charts for reading the literary weather. You can actually steer your own way through all that fog.
By mastering this language, the horror of the text isn't just something you feel anymore. It's something you can fully understand and talk about. You've become the navigator. So I guess the only question left is this. With these tools in your hand, what darkness are you going to map out next?